The series opens in the middle of the ocean aboard a massive ship designed for extracting oil from beneath the seabed. The vessel is equipped with enormous drilling machines connected directly to its systems. And a few kilometers away, there's a backup ship on standby for emergencies. Inside the main ship, we meet Rose, a company representative from the ship's owning corporation who also happens to be a biologist. Rose posts a notice in the workers' common area listing the names of employees approved for the upcoming leave. A young man named Baz checks the list for his name but doesn't find it, and he gets furious because he'd been waiting for this break. He notices that Rose added Fulmer's name instead, the ship's communications officer, and replaced him. At that time, Rose goes to inform Captain Magnus about the leave schedule, but Magnus is already talking with the company, requesting a helicopter to take part of the crew back to shore. However, he's told that all flights have been rerouted due to an emergency, and no one will be leaving for now. Magnus decides to hold a meeting with the entire crew. Before it starts, Baz complains to his friend Hutton about losing his spot on leave, and Hutton tells him not to worry, promising he'll handle it. When the meeting begins, Magnus announces that no one is getting any leave until further notice, and they must all stay on board until the company updates them. Hutton argues with him and keeps pressing with questions about how long they'll be stuck and what's really going on. Then he hints to Rose that he knows about her relationship with Fulmer, who got the leave instead of Baz. Rose denies having anything to do with the decision, saying it was made by the company because they urgently need a communications engineer. Suddenly, the entire ship loses power, and Magnus orders everyone to return to their stations immediately. He heads back to the control room with Rose and Fulmer, where Fulmer tries to contact the port or the backup ship, but the radio system is completely dead. The pressure in the drilling system starts to spike, and the safety valves can't handle the sudden overload. Captain Magnus immediately orders the lead engineer, Alwyn, to shut down and abandon the drill entirely before it explodes and kills them all. Rose gets furious, insisting the safety valves could have handled the pressure and that they've just wasted an entire day's worth of production. Magnus snaps back, telling her that the crew's safety is his top priority above everything else. He then asks Fulmer to try fixing the radio. But there's still no signal, no response from any communication channel, not even regular networks. So Magnus grabs the transmitter and heads up to the helipad to manually send a distress signal to their backup vessel. Up there, he waves his arms trying to get the attention of the other ship when he notices its lights flickering on. Suddenly, a massive wall of fog rolls in, swallowing the backup ship, and then the entire oil vessel itself. Visibility drops to 0, and Magnus's attempt to call for help completely fails. He heads back down to the control room and orders Fulmer to go up the radio tower with someone from the crew to repair the malfunction. Baz volunteers to go with him after Magnus promises to grant him his leave once this is done. The radio tower is the highest point on the entire vessel, towering several meters above deck, and the climb is extremely difficult and dangerous. Hutton, worried for Baz, tries to stop him from going because it's clear how much he cares about him, maybe even loves him, but Baz insists and climbs ahead of Fulmer. Halfway up, Baz suddenly hears a strange, eerie sound. He calls out to Fulmer in panic, but there's no answer. Out of nowhere, a pigeon appears in front of him, startling him so badly that he slips off the ladder. The safety harness catches him just in time. Moments later, Fulmer appears behind him, urging him to move faster, and they both finally reach the top of the tower. There, Baz keeps taunting Fulmer for taking his leave spot, unable to hide his anger and resentment. Fulmer snaps at Baz, telling him he has nothing to do with the situation, then goes back to fixing the radio. Baz climbs down ahead of him, but halfway down, he starts feeling something strange. Suddenly, he spots the same pigeon that scared him earlier, now lying dead. Down on deck, Magnus is talking with Alwyn when they both hear a loud thud behind them. They turn and find Baz's body sprawled on the ground. He's fallen from the top of the tower. From the height and the impact, it looks certain he's dead. Kat, the ship's medic, rushes over to check him and is shocked to find he's still alive. She has him taken to the ship's infirmary and does everything she can to save him, but it's clear he needs urgent surgery. She tells Hutton he has to be taken to a hospital, but Hutton loses control, shouting that no helicopter could ever make it through the thick fog outside, and that Kat needs to do something herself before Baz dies. Kat tells him she's doing everything possible, but Hutton storms out in rage, smashing things along the corridor. He runs into Kat again as she's coming out of the bathroom and suddenly attacks her, but Kat manages to fight him off with self-defense skills and leaves him on the floor before walking away. Furious and unstable, Hutton then goes to confront Magnus, accusing him of poor leadership and putting everyone's lives at risk. Magnus, equally angry, fires back, asking Hutton what he would have done if he were in his place. Hutton can't answer, so Magnus leaves. That's when Hutton notices a strange-looking folder on Magnus's desk. He opens it and discovers shocking information inside. A short while later, he gathers the crew on deck and exposes what Magnus and the company have been hiding, that no one is coming to rescue them. No one's even trying to help, not even for Baz. Magnus and Rose arrive to find chaos breaking out, and Magnus tries to defend himself, saying none of this is under his control, and they just have to hold on through the crisis. But Hutton holds up the folder and demands to know when Magnus planned to tell them that the project was being shut down, and that none of them would have jobs anymore. Magnus gets nervous and admits that the company forbade him from telling anyone because they didn't want the workers to resign before the project was officially shut down. Suddenly, the scene cuts to the sky, where strange particles begin to fall. At first, everyone thinks it's snow, but when they look closer, they realize it's ash. Thick gray chunks drifting down from above. Then, out of nowhere, Baz appears behind them, pale and weak, saying it's too late, that this is the end, before collapsing unconscious. Kat is stunned, unable to comprehend how Baz could even be alive, let alone awake, after the injuries he suffered. Alwyn, who had stayed beside him for hours listening to his faint, struggling breaths, is equally shocked, convinced what happened is nothing short of a miracle. In the infirmary, Kat asks Baz what he was doing on deck and what he meant earlier. Baz says he doesn't remember anything, only that there was a loud buzzing inside his head and a sense that something terrible was coming. Rose presses him, asking what kind of danger he means, and he quietly answers that it's a wave that will destroy everything. Rose doesn't understand what he's talking about, since they're nowhere near any seismic lines or zones prone to natural disasters. Back in the control room, Magnus glances down at his hand and notices a deep cut, but he ignores it. Then he orders his assistant, Grant, to lock Hutton in a room alone to keep him from stirring up more trouble. Grant goes to inform Hutton about the decision and assigns one of the crew members to guard the door. Around the same time, the crew detects distress signals coming from the backup ship. Alwyn asks the engineer, Lek, to go outside and read the light flashes, which turn out to be written in Morse code. Lek notes them down on his arm and reports back to Magnus, saying the backup ship wants to approach them. But Magnus tells Fulmer to respond with instructions to stay put until the fog wave clears. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Baz wakes up again and looks down at the deep wound on his hand, only to realize, in shock, that it's healing completely on its own. Then Baz looks at himself in the mirror and sees his injured eye healing completely, turning back to normal. Suddenly, his gaze shifts to the floor, and vivid visions start flashing before his eyes. Scenes of a massive flood devastating everything in its path. He has no idea what he's seeing, but he brushes it off, gets dressed, and prepares to leave. Just as he's about to step out, he feels a sharp pain in his teeth. Blood starts dripping from his mouth along with one of his dental fillings. Still unfazed, Baz studies a map on the wall, locating a specific room he feels drawn to. When he gets there, he sits alone, staring blankly as more strange visions appear before him. Soon, he starts drawing swirling spiral patterns on the glass wall, each circle connected by symmetrical arcs, almost like a code. A few moments later, Alwyn walks in to check on him, but Baz looks terrified, whispering that it's the end. Alwyn, confused, asks what he means, but Baz snaps and storms out of the room. Meanwhile, Rose collects a sample of the ash falling from the sky and informs Magnus that she'll analyze it to determine its biological nature. On deck, Lek returns from reading the Morse signals, his clothes covered in ash, and heads straight to shower. But as soon as he undresses, he notices his tattoo melting off his skin, and then blood begins seeping from every pore of his body until he collapses and dies. At that same moment, Hutton is trying to escape through his cabin window when he hears someone screaming. It's Nick, another crew member, whose life has just ended in agony. A little later, Heather arrives to deliver Hutton's meal, but discovers his lifeless body instead. Kat rushes in to examine him and determines he died from massive internal bleeding, caused by the ash that had coated his entire body. Shortly after, Grant bursts in holding something, Baz's tooth filling, which he found in the bathroom. Rose, now more determined, continues her analysis of the strange gray substance. She tries mixing it with several reagents, but nothing reacts, until she decides to add a drop of her own blood. Under the microscope, the ash suddenly comes alive, writhing with tiny parasitic organisms. Shocked, she immediately calls Magnus and Kat, explaining that the ash interacts with human biology, forming an internal defense that rejects any inorganic material, like the tattoo ink that covered Lek's body. And the filling from Baz's tooth, which confirms Rose's theory. Anyone exposed to the ash while having even the smallest open wound is at risk of death. Magnus immediately grabs the microphone and orders the entire crew to stay exactly where they are until further notice. While everyone is distracted, Hutton sneaks into the control room and sends distress signals to the backup ship, begging them to come rescue them from the oil vessel. Fulmer and Alwyn notice the signal transmission and rush out to check its source, but Hutton locks the doors behind them, convinced that one of them might be Magnus trying to stop him. The two men split up to find another way out or anyone who can help. Meanwhile, Magnus and the rest of the command crew see the emergency signal flashing on their monitors and hurry to the control room, where they find Fulmer shouting for help through the glass. They quickly unlock the door and pull him inside. Magnus explodes at Hutton for his recklessness and the chaos he's caused. He then orders Fulmer to send counter signals to warn the backup ship to turn back, but the dense fog makes visibility impossible. The rescue vessel keeps advancing toward them at full speed. Everyone prays it won't crash into them. Suddenly, Magnus remembers Fulmer and Alwyn, still out on the upper deck, and panics. He grabs the microphone and calls out for Alwyn to return immediately. Alwyn hears him over the intercom, but before he can move, he spots Baz walking slowly toward the ship's edge. Alarmed, Alwyn runs after him, shouting his name and begging him to stop and come back. Meanwhile, Grant decides to go find Alwyn himself. Up on deck, Baz refuses to move, telling Alwyn he has to reach the water, that the answers are there, that the truth is in the sea. Alwyn, desperate, grabs Baz by the shirt, trying to drag him back, but Baz grips him hard and demands he let go. At that moment, Grant arrives on deck just in time to see the struggle. Baz suddenly breaks free, shoving Alwyn away, and Alwyn falls hard to the ground. Grant rushes toward him, but when he reaches him, it's already too late. Alwyn is dead. Magnus and Kat rush to the scene and immediately try to revive Alwyn, completely baffled by what just happened. But as Kat presses on his chest, a large amount of water gushes out of his mouth. Stunned, she whispers that Alwyn drowned. Somehow, he drowned without ever falling into the sea. Meanwhile, Baz sits alone in a quiet corner of the ship, staring blankly until a section of the ocean suddenly begins glowing with an eerie green light. He stares in awe, then gasps as visions flash before him. He sees the exact moment of Alwyn's death playing out in his mind, as if he's reliving it through his own hands. Grief overwhelms him. Back in the crew's gathering area, Hitz notices the fog finally beginning to clear. Everyone cheers in relief, until they look out and see the backup ship engulfed in flames, burning completely. The celebration turns to horror as they realize there's now no way off the vessel except by helicopter, and that won't happen until communications are restored. Hitz suggests they should head toward the backup ship to search for any survivors, but Hutton quickly shuts her down, saying there's no way anyone could have lived through that fire, given the amount of smoke still rising. At that moment, Rose approaches Magnus and tells him she's found a way to identify which crew members have been infected by the ash. Her idea is to mix a drop of their blood with a sample of Baz's blood. If the two merge instead of separating, that means the person is infected. Magnus agrees to proceed with her plan. Meanwhile, Fulmer is walking through the ship's corridors when he hears strange noises coming from Rose's lab. Papers are scattered across the floor, and when he rushes inside, he's shocked to find Baz standing there, holding one of the blood samples. Fulmer tries to calm him down, telling him to put the vial back and that they'll help him. He also asks what really happened to Alwyn. Baz insists he didn't mean to hurt him, that the light made him do it, that it feeds on them. Fulmer stares, confused, unable to grasp what Baz means. Suddenly, Rose arrives, trying to gently talk Baz down, but the moment he sees her, he panics, grabs his vial, and bolts out of the lab. Magnus arrives just as Rose explains what happened, and she tells him that without Baz's blood, they've lost their only means of identifying who's infected. Magnus orders her to find another way, fast, before it's too late for everyone on board. Rose tells Magnus that the best thing she can do now is isolate anyone who had open wounds at the time they were exposed to the ash, just in case. Fulmer steps forward, realizing they're referring to him, and calmly says he understands and agrees to whatever they need to do. He goes with Kat to the infirmary for a full examination and remains under observation. Meanwhile, Rose continues her research, this time analyzing a crude oil sample extracted from beneath the ocean floor. To her shock, she discovers the oil originates from fossilized organisms that lived over 300 million years ago, from the Permian era, a time when nearly all life on Earth was believed to have gone extinct. She stares at the results in disbelief, unable to explain how oil formed from organisms that shouldn't have existed, suspecting that whatever's happening to them now might be connected to something ancient that's been buried for eons. At the same moment, Baz stands at the edge of the ocean and tosses his vial of blood into the water. Moments later, he heads to the ship's storage area, filled with massive oil tanks. When he touches one of the tanks, a strange greenish light ripples across its surface, and for a brief moment, he sees tiny parasitic shapes moving inside the crude tar, alive and writhing. writhing. Back on the bridge, Magnus gathers the crew for a tense meeting. He divides them into small teams of 3. One team will handle cleaning operations, while the others are tasked with finding Baz at all costs. He tells them firmly that retreat isn't an option. They must bring Baz back, whether he likes it or not. The teams spread out, and one group, led by Garrett, with Jarrow and Hutton, reaches the reprocessing center, the only part of the ship without working surveillance cameras. There, Baz is hiding among the machinery, quietly watching them. When Jarrow walks past and turns his back, Baz suddenly lunges out, attacking him before sprinting away into the dark corridors. Hutton and Grant hear the commotion and rush down to check, finding Jarrow unconscious on the floor. Before they can react, a violent tremor shakes the entire ship as if an earthquake has struck beneath the sea. The massive vessel groans and tilts, the flare stack that burns off excess gas goes out, and several steam pipes explode inside the lower decks. The lights flicker and die as the engines grind to a halt. Magnus immediately radios Rose, ordering her to have Fulmer restore the ship's power systems as fast as possible before the whole rig collapses into darkness. Despite Rose's strong objections to releasing him from isolation, she eventually gives in. Fulmer steps into the control room, assessing the situation, then decides to go down to the ship's lower decks to repair the main electrical failures himself. Before leaving, he tells Rose to activate the control switches the moment she sees the indicator lights come back on. Meanwhile, the search team spread out across the vessel. In a remote section of the platform, Baz stands silently among massive oil containers. As soon as his hand touches one, the familiar eerie glow pulses beneath the surface of the crude, spreading like veins of light. Suddenly, he hears footsteps approaching. It's Hitz. She pleads with him to come back to the ship, saying they can still help him, that he doesn't have to face this alone. But Baz refuses. He tells her he needs to stay, that they need him, and that this is his role now, to protect them. He murmurs cryptically that they were the beginning, and now they'll be the end. Hitz doesn't understand what he means, and cautiously steps closer, trying to reach him. But before she can, Jarrow appears from the shadows behind her, his eyes vacant and skin pale. He tells her coldly that it's too late, that none of them are leaving, and lunges at her. Just as he's about to grab her, Hutton bursts in and tackles Jarrow, shouting for Hitz to run. The two escape through the narrow corridors together. On their way out, they make a chilling discovery: strange plants beginning to grow directly on pools of crude oil. Thick, dark vines and glowing roots pulse with life, something that should be biologically impossible. Back in the engine deck, Fulmer manages to restore partial power, bringing the ship's systems and lights back online. The rest of the crew regroups, securing Baz and Jarrow inside the production tower to contain them. But Magnus quickly notices a critical problem. The flare stack outside, responsible for burning off excess gas, has gone out completely. That means the gas will spread through the ship until it suffocates them all. He orders the entire crew to retreat to their quarters while he thinks of a solution. Fulmer then volunteers to reignite the flare manually by getting as close as possible to the gas vent and firing a flare gun into it. Rose panics, begging him not to do it, insisting it's suicide. Fulmer gives her a faint smile, telling her that if he's infected, his fate is sealed anyway. Magnus reluctantly approves the plan and waits for Fulmer's signal near the lift controls in case anything goes wrong. Fulmer rides the lift to the upper deck, climbing into the raging wind. As he reaches the top, he slowly unhooks his safety harness, the last thing keeping him tethered to the ship. Rose freezes in shock, unable to process what Fulmer, the man she loves, is doing. Magnus realizes Fulmer's plan. He intends to reach the closest point to the gas vent, ignite it manually, and then run before the explosion spreads. Fulmer manages to fire the flare, and for a split second, the ship's tower erupts in a blinding flash of light. But before he can escape, a surge from the explosion blasts toward him, throwing him violently to the ground. Magnus rushes out immediately, fighting through the heat and smoke to reach him. He smothers the flames consuming Fulmer's back and drags him away, barely conscious, before carrying him to Kat in the infirmary. Kat treats his burns and reassures Rose afterward that the protective suit absorbed most of the blast. He'll live, though he needs rest. Relieved but shaken, Rose goes to check on Magnus. The moment he sees her, he hides his right hand. The veins along it have turned pitch black, spreading like ink under his skin. He forces a calm smile, telling her to rest and let him handle things for now. Down in the lower decks, Callie and Grant are inspecting the cargo manifests, and they notice several sealed oil containers that don't appear on any of the ship's records. Grant frowns, realizing they're handling equipment that was never logged, possibly brought aboard secretly. They decide to inform Magnus immediately, thinking he might know what's going on. Meanwhile, in the production tower, Baz and Jarrow struggle to shut down the main drill. They manage to close the safety valves, but Baz quickly spots a sharp rise in pressure along one of the deep-sea pipes. Realizing the buildup could trigger a catastrophic explosion, he reopens the valves just in time to relieve the pressure. From the readings, he understands that all the force from the reservoir below is being funneled into that single pipe, and the only way to stop it is to reach the source itself. Baz descends into a section of the platform now overtaken by strange vegetation, pulsating, luminous plants growing uncontrollably fast, spreading through every crevice. He kneels before one of them, mesmerized, and gently places his hand against its surface. A brilliant blue light flares between them, shimmering like an exchange, a silent communication. Elsewhere, Fulmer wakes up in the infirmary, disoriented but alive, and finds Rose watching over him. She smiles weakly before leaving to continue her work. On her way, she runs into Kat and Heather, who share their doubts. Heather says she no longer believes Baz is the enemy. Maybe, she argues, if they'd tried to understand him instead of hunting him, he might have helped them. She recalls his cryptic words about something ancient that lived there long before them, something now under attack, and wonders if Baz's strange behavior wasn't violence at all, but a desperate attempt to protect whatever still remains alive beneath the ocean. Rose explains calmly that there are certain types of bacteria on Earth that never truly die, organisms capable of remaining dormant for millions of years until environmental conditions awaken them again. This, she says, means they don't need help from anyone, not from the crew, and not even from Baz, because this specific strain can grow and evolve entirely on its own once the right balance is restored. Heather, puzzled, asks why such an ancient form of life would suddenly appear here, in this particular location. Rose admits she's not sure, but offers the only logical explanation. The deep ocean remains one of the least explored places on the planet, and because of that, it preserves life forms that have stored the memory of Earth's past, all its catastrophes, extinctions, and rebirths locked away in the darkness of time. Elsewhere, Magnus stands alone in the corridor, staring at his hand as the black veins creep further up his arm. His vision starts to blur, and in the dim light he sees an apparition, the faint figure of his son, who died long ago. The boy smiles softly, then turns and walks away. Magnus follows in silence until the vision fades into the shadows, leaving him shaken. Back in the lab, Rose and Heather continue working, joined by Fulmer, who insists on helping despite his injuries. The three discuss Baz's strange connection with the plants. Rose explains that it's likely based on bacterial communication, a biochemical process called quorum sensing, where microorganisms exchange chemical signals in a way that functions almost like language between humans. She isn't sure how Baz is able to interact with them, but she's convinced there's something inside him, some sensory resonance, allowing him to tune into that network. Then she wonders aloud how these bacteria managed to survive every extinction event and planetary shift throughout Earth's history. Fulmer interrupts, his tone uneasy, asking if they're sure humanity discovered the bacteria, or if humanity is actually the result of it. As he speaks, he subconsciously begins drawing strange circular patterns on the lab table, the same spirals Baz once traced on the glass of his cabin. Meanwhile, Magnus notices irregular readings from the drilling system. Baz and Jarrow are manually overriding the controls. He immediately calls for Grant, Rose, and the rest of the crew to report to the control room. The monitors show Baz tampering with the safety valves, attempting to open every oil pipe into the ocean. Magnus orders Fulmer to regain remote access to the system and re-establish control of the valves before Baz triggers an irreversible chain reaction beneath the sea. Before Baz causes the entire rig to explode, but Fulmer insists it's impossible to override the system. They can't control anything remotely while Baz is manipulating the valves manually. Rose, desperate, suggests deploying a submersible drone to close the main valves directly from the ocean floor. Magnus immediately rejects the idea, calling it too dangerous, but after multiple failed attempts to regain control, he finally relents. They summon Astor, the remotely operated vehicle specialist. Astor rushes to the control bay and begins lowering the submersible into the water. The ROV, a heavily reinforced underwater robot, is designed for missions no human could ever survive. It descends deeper and deeper into the pitch-black sea until it reaches the base of the platform, where the main safety valve lies buried beneath layers of rock and pressure. As the camera feed stabilizes, strange circular symbols appear carved into the seabed, identical to the ones Fulmer and Baz had drawn earlier. Fulmer stares at the monitor, his face pale, and realizes with horror that the infection has reached his mind. Astor continues guiding the sub toward the valve and manages to unlock it. At that exact moment, Baz senses what's happening. His expression darkens. He disconnects the system, shutting down remote access completely. But something goes wrong. A power surge fries the circuits, and a warning light flashes across the monitors. System failure. The pressure inside the main pipeline begins to spike again, and Baz realizes an explosion is imminent. With only minutes to act, he calls for Fulmer, the only one who truly understands the system's design. Baz stands before the pulsating plants, whispering softly as though communicating with them through his thoughts. Down below, Aster notices something strange. His phone suddenly lights up, network restored for the first time since the storm. Within seconds, every device aboard the ship reconnects. Magnus seizes the moment, contacting the company and nearby ports, sending urgent distress calls. The crew scrambles to reach their families. Laughter and tears mix through the chaos as voices fill the halls. Kat connects with her sister, relieved to see her face, until, mid-call, she notices the familiar fog rolling in behind her house, the same thick mist that had enveloped the rig days earlier. Panic flashes across her eyes, and she shouts for her sister to stay inside. But before she can finish, the signal collapses. The network dies again. Kat screams at the frozen screen, helpless. Meanwhile, Fulmer heads to the communications room, intending to re-establish the line. But instead of working on the system, he finds himself searching the internet for the circular symbols he'd seen carved into the ocean floor, the ones he'd unconsciously drawn. The results fill his monitor with ancient carvings, the same shapes found in prehistoric cave art across continents and millennia. Moments later, the screens flicker, and the connection cuts out completely. No one can reach the outside world anymore. Just then, Aster walks in to check on him and finds Fulmer sitting in silence, transfixed. A whisper echoes through the static-filled room. It's Baz's voice, faint but clear, calling Fulmer's name, asking him for help. Fulmer panics and rushes out of the room. Meanwhile, Magnus gathers the entire crew to update them on the latest developments. Rose notices Fulmer's absence and goes to check on him. When she enters his cabin, she finds him staring at his wounds, completely healed, as if he'd never suffered severe burns. Realizing he's infected, she's shocked. Fulmer begs her to stay away because he's been seeing strange visions again and hearing voices calling his name. Rose promises to come back for him and quickly returns to the meeting. In the control room, the crew argue with Magnus, desperate to return home to their families. Suddenly, Kat blurts out that she's pregnant, and everyone falls silent, horrified that both she and her unborn child are now at serious risk. Overwhelmed, Magnus breaks down, crying as memories of his lost son flood back. He admits he doesn't know what to do, and Rose gently tells him to rest. At that moment, Baz appears before Fulmer, asking for his help. In the valve control chamber, Baz opens his eyes, the bacteria inside him now syncing with the same strain inside Fulmer. Through the biochemical connection Rose once described, the two become linked. Jarrow asks Baz if he managed to reach him, and Baz smiles faintly, replying, "He's coming." Elsewhere, Kat stands alone on the catwalk when she spots Fulmer crossing the bridge toward the production tower where Baz and Jarrow are held. She runs after him, and Rose follows once she realizes Fulmer has disappeared. They beg him to come back, but he apologizes, saying it's no longer safe, and steps inside the tower. Kat follows him in and freezes. The place is now overgrown with luminous plants, surrounded by clouds of glowing bacteria pulsing in rhythm. Kat stops in front of one of the clusters, and it drifts toward her stomach as if sensing the life inside. Rose quickly pulls her back, and the two run out together. Suddenly, one of the crew spots a bright light on the horizon. The others rush to the deck, cheering. Believing rescue has finally arrived, they gather at the ship's edge, preparing for evacuation as the approaching light grows nearer. But one of the crew members looks toward the direction the incoming ship is coming from and says quietly that it's not a rescue vessel. We cut to Baz, who suddenly freezes, sensing something strange. He stands abruptly, murmuring that they're not alone. Moments later, the so-called rescue ship reaches the rig, but it turns out to be a small vessel, far too small to hold the entire crew. On board are 30 survivors from the backup platform known as Charlie Station. Among them is a man named David, who is greeted by Rose as he steps aboard. David insists on being taken straight to the control room, but Rose refuses, saying she can't authorize anyone she doesn't know. He then shows her his company ID card, revealing that his position in the parent corporation is much higher than hers. Reluctantly, she allows him access. Once inside the control room, David listens carefully as the officers brief him on everything that's happened. What? But his calm reaction is unsettling, as if he already knew or had seen this before. Afterward, he demands access to the production tower, but Rose tells him it's been taken over by Baz, Jarrow, and Fulmer, all three under the control of some kind of alien organism. She insists no one can reach them safely. David orders her to assemble a team to retake the tower, but Rose flatly refuses to send anyone else after already losing 2 crew members and 3 more from the last expedition. She turns and walks away, leaving him standing in silence. Meanwhile, Kat is examining the survivors from the Charlie platform, checking each for symptoms. One of them, a man named Harish, Aster's close friend, begins recounting what happened on their rig. His story mirrors their own. People started changing, behaving strangely, until the entire platform eventually exploded. He explains that they barely escaped with their lives, but what disturbed him most was David's behavior. Harish says David appeared out of nowhere, claiming to hold a senior position within the company and taking control of the survivors. Yet instead of safeguarding the oil reserves as any executive would, he did the opposite. He deliberately mixed carbon compounds into the crude for reasons no one understood. Harish warns them that David might try the same thing here. Heather, alarmed, decides to dig into the company's internal database to verify his identity, but when she searches, she finds nothing. There is no record of anyone named David holding any position in the company at all. Heather sits down with Harish and Aster, her face tense, and tells them she couldn't find anyone in the company database named David. The three exchange uneasy glances and start suspecting that David might be an alias, that his real identity is something else entirely. Heather suggests cross-checking the full roster of employees assigned to the drilling operation. Since each of them personally knows most of the legitimate workers, the unfamiliar name should stand out. Aster and Harish agree, and after combing through the list, they find one entry none of them recognize, a man named Tim. Heather digs deeper into his company records and discovers a disturbing message he'd sent months earlier. In it, he claimed to have made contact with the organisms and was working on a method to eliminate them using carbon-based compounds. That's when they realize Tim and David are the same person. Meanwhile, Rose keeps studying the strange circular symbols Fulmer used to draw, the same ones they saw carved on the ocean floor. After comparing geological timelines, she discovers something chilling. Each circle corresponds to a major extinction or transformation event in Earth's history. Every cataclysm, from volcanic winters to asteroid impacts, is represented by one of the symbols. But one circle remains incomplete, missing its closure. Rose realizes that the unfinished one symbolizes the catastrophe happening right now, the next global cycle that will reshape the planet once again. Her theory forms: the ancient organisms, possibly the plants and bacteria revived from the Permian era, are trying to communicate, warning them about what's coming. Just then, David appears again, insisting that she send a team to retake the production tower. Rose refuses firmly, standing by her decision not to risk more lives. David's expression hardens. He decides to manipulate the rest of the crew instead, leveraging his supposed authority within the company. He promises anyone who helps him regain control of the tower a promotion and new positions once the project is completed. Tempted and desperate, several crew members agree, including Hutton, Grant, and the ship's cook. David outlines his plan. They'll use the sealed oil containers that were discovered earlier, which actually contain canisters of knockout gas. The group sneaks into the tower, carrying the cylinders. As soon as they release the gas, they quickly put on their masks. A faint hiss fills the air, and moments later, Jarrow steps out of the shadows, staring at them in confusion. He demands to know what they're doing there, but before anyone can answer, the glowing light begins to stir behind him. As soon as Jarrow inhales the gas, he starts bleeding and collapses to the floor, dead. The team realizes the gas isn't a sedative, it's lethal. Panic spreads as they rush to escape, except for Grant, who stays behind. David locks the door on him, revealing his true intent: to kill them all. Meanwhile, Baz notices the gas spreading through the air and sees the plants dying from its effects. Fulmer also inhales the gas, collapses, and stops what he was doing. Back in the tower, Grant accidentally breathes it in and dies instantly. When Rose and Magnus learn what happened, they confront David furiously, but he insists he's trying to save them and the planet. Rose argues that the plants are the oldest living organisms on Earth, warning them about a disaster that could destroy the planet. Determined, she decides to shut off the gas source herself to save Fulmer as well. She takes an oxygen tank from Hutton and enters the tower, moving quickly through the smoke to find Fulmer. She finds him unconscious on the floor, holds her breath, and tries to give him oxygen, but it's no use. She drags him toward the exit, but suddenly sees the glowing airborne organisms surrounding the plants. Realizing they're trying to heal him, she places Fulmer among them. Moments later, Fulmer has a vision of a lightning vortex in the sky, then opens his eyes and regains consciousness. Together, they escape the tower. At the same time, Baz wakes up, having shielded himself among the plants to survive the gas. Fulmer tells Rose the organisms were trying to communicate all along, but no one listened. Magnus then gathers the survivors from Charlie Station for questioning. Harish recounts what happened. After the strange plants spread across their platform, David ordered all safety valves opened. The pressure in the oil pipes spiked until the platform exploded, destroying every rescue vessel except one. There had been 50 survivors, but as soon as David boarded the boat with 30 others, he left the remaining people behind and sailed away. Magnus is shocked and decides to confront David himself. David coldly defends his actions, claiming he had to eliminate all the organisms before their power grew strong enough to reach the mainland, and eventually the entire world. He tells Magnus he should understand what it's like to be stranded at sea, powerless to protect the family he left behind on land, and insists that everything he's done is to save humanity from destruction. David tries to convince Magnus to join him, arguing that by weakening the organisms, they can prevent them from spreading and taking over humankind. Magnus leaves the room, deeply conflicted, and tells Rose what he's learned. Rose tells him she'll find another way to stop the plants without killing them. Magnus urges her to hurry. Their time is running out. Rose rushes to Fulmer, asking him to try communicating with the organisms to show them that humans aren't a threat. She believes Baz was trying to protect the creatures, and that's why they've only been defending themselves. Fulmer places his hand on the plants, closes his eyes, and suddenly sees visions. Aircraft rising from the sea, and then a massive tsunami forming offshore, heading straight for land. He realizes a new wave is coming, one that will kill hundreds of thousands. Magnus, desperate, announces he'll follow David's plan, believing it's their only chance, and goes to speak with him to hear the full details. Magnus agrees on one condition: no one else will die during the operation. David nods, pretending to accept, but as soon as Magnus leaves, he pulls out his phone and activates an emergency protocol, revealing he's been following a completely different plan all along. At the same time, Rose finalizes her own counterplan, a controlled detonation that could release the organisms safely instead of destroying them. She begs Magnus to give her one chance to communicate with them, to make them understand the crew means no harm. Magnus reluctantly agrees, but only if they bring Baz back with them. Together, they head to the production tower, where they find the plants have multiplied, covering every surface. Meanwhile, David approaches Harish privately and tells him he has an alternative plan of his own. David explains that the company had always known what kind of threat they were dealing with. That's why a contingency plan was created in case everything went wrong. He tells Harish to come with him to the control room and announces that he's going to execute the same procedure he used before on the previous rig. He begins opening all the safety valves to increase the internal pressure, planning to blow up the entire ship. To calm Harish, he lies and says helicopters are already on their way to rescue them. Pretending to cooperate, Harish acts as if he's repairing the remote control system to help open the valves. But while David is distracted, he quietly activates the ship's internal microphone so everyone on board can hear their conversation. Harish then asks David how many people died on the last rig, the ones he left behind. David replies coldly that people don't matter, that their mission is far greater than saving a few lives that contribute nothing to humanity. Harish, furious, calls him a coward hiding behind the mistakes of his company, the same company responsible for creating these creatures and unleashing them in the first place. David, enraged, punches him repeatedly and warns that unless Harish helps him finish the plan, he'll die along with everyone else on the ship. The entire crew hears everything over the intercom. Realizing the truth, Aster, Heather, and Kat rush toward the control room to stop the safety valves from opening. David notices the alarms and bolts toward the helipad to escape, but Hutton is already there waiting for him. He attacks David, furious over his lies and the death of Grant, determined to kill him. Before he can finish, Hitz arrives and stops him, shouting that 2 helicopters are on their way, that if they kill David now, they'll lose their only chance to leave. She pleads with Hutton to let him go so they can get off the ship and deal with him later. Reluctantly, Hutton backs off. Hitz orders the rest of the crew to prepare for evacuation, gathering everyone near the landing pad. At that same moment, Magnus, Rose, Fulmer, and Baz arrive. They urge Baz to try one last time to reach the organisms, to show them that humans aren't there to destroy, but to coexist. Baz collapses, saying he can't hear them anymore, that the connection is gone. Rose steps closer to the plants, which are now surrounded by glowing parasitic light. She slowly extends her hand toward them and begins to speak. The organisms form a perfect closed circle, and Rose suddenly understands. They're telling her the catastrophe has begun, that a new age of extinction has started for all living things. A violent tremor shakes the ocean floor, and the visions Baz and Fulmer had seen begin unfolding across the planet. Realizing their mission has failed, Magnus orders everyone to evacuate, but Baz refuses to leave, saying he has to stay with the organisms and protect them until the end, so they can see that humans are capable of sacrifice and cooperation, hoping that might stop the destruction. Magnus and the others say their final goodbye and escape together, rushing toward the helipad. At the last second, they manage to board the final helicopter with David. As the aircraft lifts off, massive fissures split open across the ocean bed, unleashing a colossal flood that swallows the entire rig, tearing it apart in seconds. From above, they watch in horror as the ship disappears beneath the waves, realizing the catastrophe has truly begun. Magnus tells the pilot to return home as fast as possible, but David interrupts with a cold smile and says, "This helicopter isn't taking taking you home. The screen fades to black.